Today I have another PLTR stock update for you. I'm going to round up some recent news and market activity, share my analysis on it, and spell out what it means for the week ahead. But first, a happy Easter to those of you celebrating. There is so much to get through. Let's go. Before I get into the news, I think it's a good idea to check up on exactly how much Palantir Ark Invest holds. Ark owns a shocking combined 18 plus million shares at this point across its flagship Ark K fund and Internet Ark W fund. It's interesting to note that Kathy is starting to buy more heavily in Ark K, it appears, instead of continuing to add to Ark W, as the Ark team initially did. Largely, I feel this is a net benefit because it means Ark Invest wants Palantir more central to its holdings, and after all, Ark K is its biggest and most well-known ETF with the most eyes on it. Also, I think it's only a matter of time before Ark adds PLTR to its newest Ark X fund. Why would Palantir have anything to do with space? Well, if that's a question you're asking, you probably don't know much about the company, and I'd direct you to some of my previous videos, since Palantir's software touches today, or will touch in the future, every industry in the world. And considering its involvement and role with the US government, I think PLTR would fit nicely into the so-called aerospace beneficiary company slot for, quote, companies whose operations stand to benefit from aerospace activities, including agriculture, internet access, GPS, construction, imaging, drones, and have a look at this, air taxis and electric aviation vehicles. Now we know Palantir is in charge of operating drones. They took that over from Google for the US government and some sort of secret project there, but also there are some newer reports that I've covered that Palantir is working with Lilium, a air taxi and electric aviation vehicle producer. So while Lilium is not in Ark X yet, Ark Invest does actually hold some of those companies, so whether or not Palantir gets added for that reason, I don't know, but I strongly believe Palantir will be added at some point in the near future. So yeah, Ark is adding nicely to Palantir and doing what they've done with Tesla in the past, what has made them famous: buy during the corrections, uncertainty, and doomsday talk. Now, speaking of an institution holding the stock, let's take a look at the updated institutional ownership of PLTR given recent data. I've been sporadically providing updates on this, and I do get asked to share it sometimes, as it is an underlying indication of the conviction of the funds with big money backing or not backing Palantir. Here's the historical data that I've previously pulled. November 25th, institutional ownership was at 12%, and flash forward to February 26th, it was at 22%. Now it's at roughly 18.5%. A decrease looks bad, sure, but I think this is actually bullish. Here's why. From the best of my research, and I could be wrong on this, however, I think it's quite clear, over the past couple months, the growth stock crash has been partly caused by firms cycling investments from high-risk, high-return growth stocks, such as Tesla and even the 6-month public Palantir, into safer bets elsewhere. Now, luckily, I have the data from a few key points on the stock chart, so let's analyze it. In late November, the stock spiked from a lot of retail action, and the institutional ownership was still quite low at the time. Over the following weeks and months, though, it nearly doubled and backfilled some of that increase in valuation. But as of today, ownership is down roughly 15% from where it was on February 26th of this year, and the stock itself is only down 4% from that point. So, my long-winded point is that the deflation of institutional ownership, that being the large entities that choose to hold PLTR, is only natural in times like these. Flash forward to a recovery in growth names, and that money will pour back in. Maybe that takes a little while. As I've been saying, it could be weeks or months until many of these stocks return to anywhere near all-time highs. Regardless, if Palantir beats earnings and continues to prove itself to the institutional investors, that incremental increase in ownership coming back could set off some serious fireworks if the stock starts moving from retail investors again as well. Moving on to the news proper, and this this is only something that has been circulating around the Twitter sphere and on Reddit. I could not find any mainstream media articles on this good news, of course. Anyways, Palantir just won a new contract with the US Department of Energy, potentially worth up to $89 million, depending on how long the contract extends for. It turns out that only $7 million is obligated, with the $89 million being a potential total. And I'll be the first to say this is not much in comparison to PLTR's 40-something billion dollar market cap. So please don't have any unrealistic expectations as to how the stock will react, if at all, to this news. Every contract adds up. Sure, but this millions in contracts will not 10x this stock. As regular viewers know, I'd rather look at the meaning, the why behind something like this, because that's what indicates the value and big time potential for Palantir, and that is Palantir's infiltration and continued expansion in the US government. From my very first video on PLTR, I've always talked about they have a long way to go with their enterprise business, but the truth is that the government side also has a considerable amount of growth to be expected going forward, and it's very important not to leave this other half of the business out when talking about growth contributions. For instance, full year government revenue increased 77% in 2020 year over year from 2019. That's an amazing figure and one to be continued as Palantir expands to empower each arm and branch of the government. This Department of Energy deal is an indication of that, and we know with President Biden in the White House and Democrats in power, government spending will continue at a rapid pace. I don't follow it that closely, but the infrastructure bill could be a boost to Palantir. We'll find out more on that later in the year. It's got everything from electric vehicles and EV stations to bridges, highways, roads, and main streets, to Amtrak repairs, to public transit, to airports, miscellaneous projects, to road safety, and you guessed it, much, much more. I don't know how much, if any, Palantir could get from this, maybe under the miscellaneous projects section, or licensing its platforms in any one of these individual segments. But Palantir is bipartisan when it comes to its work for the US government. It is ready to serve to the best of its ability. But the question is, will the Biden administration choose Palantir? Do they even know about Palantir? A few days ago, I came across a great piece of content, and I've linked the full video in the description. I highly recommend you check it out if you have not already done so. So I'm about to insert a quick clip of Max explaining the connection between Palantir and the Biden administration that is bound to be a benefit to PLTR in the coming years. Just to wrap up the discussion of the DoE deal and everything else I just said about Palantir's government work.
And we can see in their history on the 2010 to 2012 section, on June 18th, 2010, Vice President Joe Biden and the Office of Management and Budget Director Peter Orszag held a press conference at the White House announcing the success of fighting fraud of the 2009 stimulus bill. Yes, there was also a stimulus bill back in 2009. But Biden, who was the vice president back then, credited the success of fighting that fraud to a certain software company, Palantir. And this got me thinking, oh, is there a deeper connection between Biden and Palantir? I've never heard of this before, and it appears to the agency that there's an inherent problem with their system. Now, the Recovery Board knew that it needed to close these loopholes as it put out that stimulus bill back in 2009, and it turned out a software platform by Palantir Technologies helped accomplish that task and was obviously very successful about it, so much so that President Biden, who was then vice president, praised the successes of the platform and how they viewed the data in a more holistic way and were able to draw connections that the government was not able to draw anywhere else. She holds a seat in Biden's cabinet. Palantir paid her $180,000 in consulting fees. Is 100% a connection, monetarily even, between Palantir and Avril Haines, who sits on Biden's cabinet. We can see Attorney General Kamala Harris announces Department of Justice joins Innovative Law Enforcement Data Initiative. And one of those companies in partnership, Palantir. And this says California Attorney General Kamala D. Harris, the contract towards achieving this shared goal of improved data sharing in California has been awarded to Enterprise Networking Solutions in partnership with Palantir Technologies.
Recently, we've also seen some FUD about Alex Karp selling shares. Co-founder Alex Karp sold $10.4 million worth of shares last week. That's terrible, right? How could the CEO selling shares not be the end of the world? Sarcasm noted, I hope. Well, it turns out this was a transaction intended to cover his tax liability tied to the vesting of certain restricted stock units. We've seen insider selling since the lockup expiration, and every time it happens, people freak out. Once and for all, here's what I have to say. Karp and every other employee has spent nearly 2 decades on building this company from the beginning. If they were in it just for the money, they would not still be dedicating their lives to Palantir's success. Yet here they all are, verbally committing to the long-term value of this business, and, in some cases, specifically setting a time frame as far out as 15 years into the future. That's even longer than Elon Musk is likely to be CEO of Tesla. If they need the money to pay taxes or live a rich lifestyle, they certainly have the means to do so. As long as their number one focus is on the prosperity of Palantir as a business itself and then delivering shareholder value, there is no need to question their actions. Moving on to some lesser known news. Palantir just paid off some debt and doubled its credit. Credit Suisse, Morgan Stanley, and Royal Bank of Canada doubled PLTR's credit line and commitment to Palantir from $200 million to $400 million, and this could actually range up to $500 million, thanks to some research by Palantir.news on Twitter. And it goes without saying that paying off debt and increasing credit lines is nothing but good news. I remain unsure if this will lead to any meaningful increase in confidence in Palantir, but I think it only strengthens Palantir's monetary position. What do you think Palantir could use its increased credit lines for? Leave a comment. From Ark Invest totals to lower institutional ownership, to the Department of Energy and government connections, to debt paid off and credit lines increased, I think the weeks ahead for Palantir will be exciting, especially leading into the double-click event. Not all of these will move the stock, but they certainly get me excited about the future of this company, and that's what I'm focused on. I hope this extended holiday roundup was insightful. Drop a like if you found it useful, and leave any PLTR predictions in the comments. I've got so much content planned. Until next time.